Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you're viewing this webinar. My name is Dave Nagel. I'm very excited to share some information with my friends and colleagues in Rutherford County Schools on the importance and power of clear success criteria to help students guide their learning and provide some examples and opportunity for any of the groups that are watching this to possibly use this as a learning opportunity, but also a time to maybe practically apply some of the ideas I'm going to share. For those of you who don't know me, I've had the privilege to work with several of the administrators and teachers at all the schools several days here this past summer and fall. My background is in secondary education. This is the middle and high school webinar, middle school and high school teacher, and twice I've been certified in visible learning. One of the things I want to mention in any webinar that isn't interactive like this one, the opportunity for you to send an email, ask any questions. If you're on Twitter, certainly it's a place to interact with me or to follow me on Twitter. But I just wanted to provide that opportunity as I can't pause the recording and answer questions. There will be a few times that I will encourage the group to pause the recording, reflect on the questions, and at the very end, maybe complete a simple activity to apply some of the ideas and concepts that I'm going to share. I'm going to start with something I'm going to talk about throughout the webinar, which is clarity. And that starts with learning intentions, which are for the teacher. We might call them learning goals, but I kind of have two coming into this webinar. And that's to understand the importance in developing students' assessment capabilities through clear success criteria, and then to develop an action or application in your classroom setting for developing success criteria for an upcoming lesson or set of lessons. For you as the learners, you'll know you have met that learning intention when you can do these three things. By the end of this webinar, you should be able to list the rationale for why success criteria is critical to guide student learning. List 4 attributes, I actually put attributes on there twice, of effective and empowering success criteria, and develop for an upcoming lesson or set of lessons some clear success criteria from an academic standard or academic standards. So, teacher clarity, when we're talking about both learning intentions and success criteria, is critical to drive feedback. And in our schools, we have a clarity problem. There should not be a student that is sitting in any classroom who doesn't know what they're learning, how they'll demonstrate it, or how they'll be graded. Same thing applies to teachers. There shouldn't be a teacher who, during an observation, doesn't know what the expectations are and how they'll know if they meet them. And far too often, we aren't as clear as we could be. And a lot of our students play this role. And usually if I have an audience with me, we laugh and chuckle, but we know we've all been there where, what do you want me to write? Or should I just hopefully guess? We want to eliminate that guessing by being as clear as we can. And the solution is clarity. Clarity in the form of learning intentions, but specifically success criteria. The learning intentions are for us, the teachers, and then we highlight those through clear success criteria, which I'm going to guide us through some short examples in this particular webinar geared towards middle and high school teachers. So, learning intentions and success criteria. If learners are to take more responsibility for their own learning, they need to know what they're going to learn, how they will recognize when they have succeeded, and why they should learn it in the first place. Now, why they should learn it isn't just because it's going to be on the test. What I'm getting at is I'm sitting in a classroom completing a graphic organizer. I'm completing my graphic organizer not to just complete that task. I'm completing that graphic organizer because I'm separating my ideas from my opinions, from what I can base in evidence, what my next steps are. So the learning intentions are the what and the why. The success criteria will be, I will write my argumentative essay. I will write my science lab. I will take that graphic organizer example that I just described and I will apply it. So they're both important, but it's that success criteria at the end, the finished product or performance, that's really critical, that students or any learner is aware of as they are learning something. So I pulled a few quotes from Mitch Absalom, and really good author and researcher around success criteria, and I will leave these up. Won't read all three pieces of the statement because some of these I've already mentioned to some degree, but that middle one, that middle bullet, when learning and the path towards it are clear, research shows that there's a number of important shifts for students. And think about when we were learning how to convert ourselves from a PC to a Mac, or we were learning a new skill. The more we were able to see what the outcome was and the goal, the more we were able to monitor if we were getting closer to it and how much faster our learning accelerated. If we're hitting a golf ball and we're getting golf lessons, we're learning and applying that and being able to, we've all been there when someone's helping us do something and like when I was working on my new Mac and had to put my hand up and say, get away from me for a second. I need to do this myself. And it will increase the motivation to stay on task, and the student's behavior improves, and they're more likely to take responsibility for their learning. And I stress that always. As a middle school and high school teacher, a parent of 3 boys, I said they will take more responsibility. It's not going to be perfect every time, but we certainly increase the chances. So can our students in our classroom right now answer these 4 questions? What am I learning? Why will I be applying this? And then how will I learn it, which is the process, and how will I know, which is my product? And I want to talk a lot throughout this webinar about that process versus product. Far too often, as I mentioned, I'll go back to that example, students think they're completing a graphic organizer. Maybe it's because they get points or they're graded. That graphic organizer was a means to the end. It was a means to writing the essay, writing the lab, writing the social studies timeline. So do they understand those 4 pieces? And the more we can increase their awareness, the more they have a chance to begin to guide their own learning and have their learning increase at much higher levels. And clear success criteria will also support the impact of teacher feedback. A lot of teachers give great feedback, but at times it's not as effective because it's not linked back to the success criteria. And certainly, as we've gone through visible learning, this will increase greater assessment capability in all of our students, whether they're kindergartners or seniors in high school in Rutherford County. When we look at the research of Dylan William, and I stress that first word, effective feedback. And if I ask anyone to think of a time when they received feedback in their life that was effective, it's not about positive or negative. Did it increase your performance? But effective feedback can double the speed of our learning. And the purpose of feedback anytime is to close whatever gap is present. And the gap is from where I should be, from where I am now. And when we think about any of our students who are playing on an app or an iPhone or PlayStation, they're always doing this. They know where they need to be, they know where they're at now, and they're learning from their mistakes so they know how to close that gap. But what's critical is the success criteria that we provide for them, or that the game provides for them, of where they need to go next. Happens in athletics, happens in band and choir and the performing arts, and we can certainly increase its presence in our academic classes. Myself as a former science teacher, English, math, social studies, etc. That success criteria is what starts feedback to be effective, because it tells you here's where you need to be, and then you can determine if you're not there, how far away you might be. So I'm going to ask you to pause the recording as long as you need to and reflect on this question. How do you, as a classroom teacher, or the administrators that are watching, because it's different, your classroom as the teachers that you work with, but how do you currently use specific learning targets and success criteria with your students to drive the effectiveness that you provide them? To make sure that as I'm giving you feedback, and you connect it to what I said in the beginning. I'm going to pause momentarily. Please pause as long as you need. Have as much of a reflection if you're in a staff meeting or group. It's a great time to pause and have some folks share and reflect on any of the points I've mentioned so far. I'll pause briefly, and then I'll come back in just a moment. Welcome back. As always, I expect that you pause the recording as long as you needed to, and I will move on to keep the length of the webinar as short as possible, but utilize as much time as needed. So I'm going to move on to the second part. So when we talk about success criteria, we rely on Shirley Clark's work, a phenomenal author and researcher and very practical in her approach. But success criteria summarizes the steps or the ingredients that the students need in order to fill that learning intention. To complete your science lab, it needs to include all of your opening points, your hypothesis, all the steps you took, the things you checked for control, your lab results, your summary, and your conclusion. There's my success criteria. A lot of times we as teachers go in thinking these points. We need to communicate them more and effectively as we can to the students for what are the main things that we need to focus on in our lab. And I just highlighted some important ones. As a former science teacher, I might have gotten caught up at times that their graph was perfectly aligned. Certainly it'd be nice if their graph was aligned, but they might have focused more on the straight edge than if their results were accurate and empowered their hypothesis. So it helps make sure that we focus on the main points. And success criteria need to meet these 4 points. As I mentioned in the start of the webinar, what are the 4 main points of success criteria? They need to be concrete, measurable, observable, and in some point up to negotiation. I was reviewing some lessons and success criterion pieces from in another district, and one of the points that the teacher had put on the paper was that students were not to rush through the assignment, and if they did, they would have to do it again. Now, I think we can all understand, as a former teacher myself, when students are lazy and haphazard, but I can't really measure or observe if they went through it fast. They might go through it fast and actually have the right answer, and I might want them to write it more neatly. But my point is that's not really concrete or measurable or observable. I also want to talk about ones that are up for negotiation. Two kinds of success criteria. There's closed skills, right or wrong. There are 5 steps in the scientific method. There are 3 main parts of an animal cell. 5 times 6 rarely equals anything other than 30. Those are easy if we provide them to students for them to monitor themselves against. They can count, they can measure those quantitative pieces. So this is a great place to bring the students in early. It's the open skills where they're neither right or wrong. Was that really the best answer? Was that really the best choice of evidence? Was that really the strongest piece of evidence to defend your argument? That's where they're up to negotiation. That's where a scoring guide comes into play. And that's where we need to allow the students some say-so and helping them provide their own feedback and helping us guide them there when they're more qualitative and less concretely measurable. I'm going to walk us through one final piece where I guide us through a couple examples, a couple math, and at least one language arts. But effective success criteria are linked to the learning intention, specific to the activity that we're doing. And that's something I can say as a teacher myself that I always maybe could have improved upon, but we might have learning intentions, but the activity that I was doing, I thought of that first. Do they really link to what I'm doing? They're discussed and agreed upon. The students know way in advance before we begin. They can provide and should provide a scaffold so students can see how they're moving from one level to the next. And we think about, I refer a lot to the PlayStation and Xbox metaphor. Students are always trying to get to that next level. And they're used as a basis for feedback as well as peer and self-assessment. When we have clear success criteria, students can provide their own feedback. Their peers also can help them provide feedback. So I'm going to guide us through this last piece where we talk about the standard, the criteria, and then effective and empowering scoring guides or rubrics. So let's start with a couple math examples. Listed here are a priority standard, a 6th grade math standard. Students are to make tables of equivalent ratios, relating quantities to the whole number measurements, find the missing values in the table, and plot the pairs of values on a coordinate plane, and then use table to compare that ratio. So I always need to start, of course, with my academic standard. And so now from that, I've listed the standard above. Students need to make tables of equivalent ratios relating the quantities, plot the values, etc. And then let's take a look at the question. The table below shows equivalent values 7 to 5. Fill in the missing values, explain how you determined the missing values, and check out our success criteria. Correctly include the missing values, explain how the relationship between the numbers at the top and the bottom are used, explain the values, how the values were added to the table. Now as a student, I can begin to monitor that. As a teacher, I can quickly check if they've met that, and notice what I did for the approaching or the emergent. Far too often, scoring guides or rubrics include way too much detail for what's not proficient. I've even seen my son come home with a description of what his paper would look like if it was terribly bad. More important to say, no, it's here's our 3 points. You've met 2 of these. You've met 1 of these. And so our success criteria and our rubric should align to the problem and at some point be as aligned as it can be back to the standard. Let's look at another one, shall we? Same standard again, making tables of equivalent values relating to quantities, etc. I won't read it again to everyone. And here's a problem. If there are 36 dogs in the neighborhood, how many cats would there be? Use the table of equivalent ratios by the ordered pairs on the coordinate, number of cats, explain your prediction. So students have to make an accurate prediction of how many cats there will be. Remember when I talked earlier about up for negotiation? There's not an exact number here, but certainly we can get in the ballpark. There's an accurate prediction as to why, and calculating the number of cats and explaining their prediction. There's not one way alone with verbatim words that students could explain their prediction. I think we can all say there's not infinite. And so this is where we can have a little bit of negotiation and also get inside the students' thinking and understanding, oh, okay, I see where they were going. Now I got a better chance to understand maybe what they're missing. And once again, to simplify our lives, meets 2 of the criteria, meets 1 or less. So much more empowering to the student, and probably above all else as a teacher will save us time. We can circle 2 of the bullet points they have and either score it with a certain number of points or hand it back to the student and say, you're missing your prediction. Let's move on to one more high school example. What I did here is I took a social studies standard and combined it with a Common Core writing standard. So the priority standard was to analyze the roles of activities in political parties, interest groups, and mass media, and how they affect the beliefs and behaviors of local, state, and national constituencies. And then they aligned that with, for students to be able to show me that they can do that, they're going to have to write something. So they took the Common Core standard and focused on writing arguments focused on precise claims, distinguishing from an opposing claim, and a counterclaim. So there's our standards. Now, in this situation, just put the main social studies standard there on the left. The teacher came up with 3 learning intentions. Students needed to understand how political parties, interest groups, and mass media impact how people believe, how they act at the national, state, and local levels. Develop an argument as to why certain factors influence people's beliefs and actions, and state possible counterpoints to the claim. From that, we have our success criteria. Analyze evidence from multiple sources to make strong claims or argument. List and expand upon 1 or 2 possible counterpoints to your claim and argument. Those are listed with asterisks because the teacher felt that those are skills that students are going to do multiple times throughout the year. It's not one time that they would analyze an argument. But for this particular set of lessons, then they would need to then use those 2 points to determine the powers and limitations of political parties, identify possible or likely beliefs of 2 or more constituent groups, and to indicate specific examples of how constituent group beliefs drive their actions and behaviors, because one of the actions and behaviors of a constituent group is how they vote. Oh, I need to pause it there for 1 second because I left out the final piece. Apologize for that. I had moved a slide over. So from that, here's a short constructive response item. Considering the results of the 2016 presidential primary election, write 1 to 2 paragraphs explaining how constituent beliefs may have been affected by political parties, the interest groups, and the mass media. So you see there on the left-hand side, achieves the criteria linked right back to the previous standard and success criteria. Accurately identified political parties who were involved in the elections, correctly identify 2 to 3 common constituent beliefs related to the political parties. State with examples 2 to 3 constituent group behaviors influenced by mass media, and explain with examples how interest groups reached voters and impacted the candidates they supported. A couple of points. One of the things I want to mention is at times we can help focus our students and not have them go above unnecessarily beyond more examples and go deeper with a few. If you give me 4 examples, I'm going to give it back. I want 2 to 3. I want at least 2, maybe you give me 3. And so we can help guide them and focus their amount of writing, amount of things they give us, that it makes it a little bit easier to score, less total information, but might have more quality. And once again, you're progressing if you meet 3 of those 4. You're emergent if you meet 2 or less. So again, we have standard, criteria, and then it goes right into the scoring guide or the task, which is what we would call hand to glove. If it's in the scoring guide, we should have seen it in the criteria. If it's in the criteria, it should be in the scoring guide. If not, it needs to fit. So our final reflection and an action. For an upcoming lesson, that you can think to start with a specific academic standard and develop success criteria tied to a student task. Well, what's coming up? Maybe something you're going to teach in January, starting with the standard, success criteria into a specific student task. You can come back to this after we kind of finish these last parts of the webinar. I want to take just a moment. Once again, I didn't have my exact slide lined up. I'm going to pull it back. Wanted to finish with the success criteria from the beginning of the webinar. I had moved the slides around preparing an elementary and high school version. I apologize for that, but here we go. Sorry for that. By the end of this webinar, you should be able to list the rationale why clear success criteria is critical to guide student learning. And hopefully you've seen that potential not only in effectively empowering their feedback, or the feedback you give them, but making it maybe easier on teachers when they're developing scoring guides and rubrics to lessen our workload. 4 attributes of effective empowering success criteria are concrete, observable, measurable, and certainly up to negotiation. And for an upcoming set of lessons, what are some clear success criteria you can develop from an academic standard? I thank you as always for the opportunity to share some thoughts and ideas. I apologize I moved a couple of those slides around. If you have any questions or thoughts or follow-up from this, please shoot me an email at dave.nagel@core1learning.net. There's my Twitter handle, and please visit core1.com for more information on visible learning and many other topics and services they provide. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your December and a great holiday.